I remember the first time we set foot in the Ashcroft House, the air already thick with something that didn't belong. The others were joking, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that clung to the broken windows and peeling wallpaper. But I could feel it, something watching, patient, just beyond the edge of hearing. Our team had been called in after a series of strange recordings surfaced online. No one could explain them. Muffled whispers, faint taps, voices that seemed to echo from nowhere. My role was simple: record, document, and analyze, but I could sense the house had different plans. As we unpacked our gear in the main hall, the wooden floorboards groaned beneath our boots, each squeak echoing unnaturally, like the house was breathing along with us. Ethan, our tech specialist, was setting up the microphones while Jenna, the skeptic, rolled her eyes at every creak. Michael, our leader, was already sketching out the floor plan, mumbling about ideal placement for maximum pickup. I wandered to the corner near the fireplace, running my hand along the cold stone mantel. The air shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, like a sigh that shouldn't exist. I blinked, and the sensation was gone. Our first night was quiet, too quiet. I sat in the main room, headphones snug over my ears, listening for anything unusual. The static hiss of the equipment was comforting in its familiarity, but beneath it, I thought I heard a soft hum, so faint I almost questioned my own hearing. "Nothing yet," Ethan whispered from across the room, peering into his laptop. I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The hum returned, subtle, almost melodic, threading between the white noise. My heart thumped a little faster. Later, when we reviewed the first batch of recordings, the hum was gone. In its place, faint whispers curled through the audio, like someone speaking just beyond comprehension. They didn't sound human, not exactly, but they weren't random. There was intent behind the words, though we couldn't make out a single clear sentence. I found myself replaying them again and again, searching for patterns, for meaning. And though I told myself it was just interference, I couldn't ignore the shiver that ran down my spine when the whispers seemed to react to my own questions. By the end of that night, the house felt alive. Not alive in the way a building creaks and settles, but in a way that knew we were there. And I began to wonder if we had walked into a place that remembered us, long before we ever arrived. The next day, we moved deeper into the house. The walls seemed tighter, the ceilings lower, as if the building itself was leaning in to listen. Michael set up a small control station in what had once been the dining room, wires snaking across the floor like veins. Jenna complained about the dust and the smell, but even she flinched at every creak and whisper that we couldn't explain. I took my recorder and wandered down the narrow hallway leading to the bedrooms. The air was colder there, unnaturally so, and my breath fogged in front of me. I stopped at a cracked mirror and caught movement in its reflection, just at the edge, something that wasn't me. I blinked, and it was gone. Back in the dining room, Ethan played back the morning's recordings. At first, it was just the usual static, the faint groans of the old building. But then, beneath it, I heard it, a whisper, deliberate, responding to my own thoughts. I couldn't understand the words, but it paused exactly when I held my question in my mind. "Did anyone else hear that?" I asked, my voice too loud in the quiet room. Michael leaned closer, frowning at the waveform on the screen. "Nothing in real time," he said, but even he hesitated, as if listening harder could change what we were hearing. Over the next few hours, the whispers became bolder. They twisted through the recordings, almost like echoes, forming patterns that teased comprehension. Sometimes they mimicked snippets of our voices, Ethan's laugh, Jenna muttering a curse under her breath, only stretched and warped, unhuman but familiar. I started recording myself asking simple questions. "Who are you?" I whispered into the microphone. Later, when we replayed it, a reply threaded through the static. Not words exactly, but syllables, tones, pauses that felt intentional. Something was answering us, shaping the sound. Ethan's hands shook as he fiddled with the playback speed. "It's intelligent," he said. It's listening and responding. But why through the recordings? Why not just appear? I didn't answer. I was too aware of the silence between us, of the way the house seemed to watch, to wait. Every time a door groaned or the floor shivered, I imagined the presence just out of reach, studying us through our own voices. By evening, none of us felt safe wandering alone. I stayed close to the equipment, headphones on, listening. The whispers had learned to mimic hesitation, fear, even my own voice asking, "Are you real?" And for the first time, I realized the house wasn't just observing. It was communicating. Not in words we understood, but in tones that burrowed into the mind, threading us closer into something I didn't yet have the courage to name. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the floorboards, every whispering draft, seemed amplified in the dark. I sat with my recorder on my lap, headphones pressed to my ears, listening to the day's tapes over and over. The more I listened, the more the whispers seemed to shape themselves, not just responding, but anticipating. At first, it was subtle. A pause where none should have been. A sigh echoing my own exhale. Then came the voice that made my blood run cold. A near-perfect imitation of Jenna's, whispering my name. My heart jumped, and I ripped the headphones off. "I swear I didn't say that," Jenna said, appearing in the doorway, her eyes wide, trembling. It said your voice," I stammered, pointing at the laptop. The waveform flickered as if alive, pulsing under the distorted sound. Ethan ran his fingers over the controls. It's learning us," he muttered. "It's not just responding, it's listening, remembering. It's tracking our behavior, our speech, even our fears." Michael paced, silent for a moment before muttering, "We need to document everything. Every word, every action. If it's intelligent, it's forming a pattern. Patterns are predictable." But predictability was an illusion. I started noticing the whispers in the room itself, faint but undeniable. Not from the speakers, not from the tape, but curling through the air, imitating breaths, footsteps, laughter ours and no one else's. I took my recorder into the bedrooms, desperate to test it. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. Later, replaying the recording, I heard it, not answering me in words exactly, but in syllables, tones, subtle intonations, almost like a conversation in a language I instinctively understood. My chest tightened. The entity knew I was afraid, and it seemed to enjoy it. By the early hours, paranoia had taken root. Jenna refused to be alone. Ethan started obsessively replaying tapes, adjusting speed, pitch, reverse playback, anything to extract clarity. Michael retreated to his sketches, muttering to himself about mapping the voices and patterns. I couldn't stop thinking about the first night's hum, now magnified. The sense that the house itself had a heartbeat, synced to ours, and that heartbeat was listening. It wasn't just observing, it was influencing. I found myself pausing mid-step, mid-breath, as if afraid the entity would notice. And then, for the first time, I heard it clearly on playback, a word. Not my own, not Jenna's, not Ethan's, but mine. Just a single syllable, stretched and warped, yet unmistakable. "You!" It was not a greeting, not a threat, just a recognition. That simple word drilled into me a terrifying certainty. We weren't alone, and whatever this was, it had already started to claim us. Not our bodies, not yet, but our perception, our minds. By the time dawn's pale light bled through the cracks in the blinds, I realized the house was no longer simply a building. The whispers no longer simply sounds. They were a presence, waiting, calculating, and I was not sure anyone could leave unchanged. By the fourth night, the house had changed. It wasn't just the shadows that seemed longer or the floorboards that groaned beneath invisible weight. It was the air itself, thick with something unseen. Every corner felt alive. Every reflection in the cracked mirrors a momentary threat. We tried to maintain normal routines, but the whispers had become bolder. They mimicked our conversations, repeated our doubts, and sometimes spoke in voices none of us recognized. I caught myself freezing mid-sentence as if the entity had predicted my words. I decided to test it, deliberately asking the recorder questions I hadn't voiced aloud. "Who are you?" I whispered into the microphone. Later, when I replayed it, the answer was chilling. A long, distorted sequence of sounds that followed the cadence of my own voice, ending in a tone that felt almost like laughter. Not friendly laughter, but something pleased with our terror. Ethan's eyes were red from hours of analyzing tapes. "It's adapting," he said, voice trembling. "Every time we record, it learns more about us, our fears, our speech patterns, even our silence. We're predictable." Jenna snapped at him, frustration and fear tangled in her tone. "Predictable? We're people, not machines. How can it even know what we're thinking?" I didn't answer. I was already feeling it. The slow, creeping awareness that wherever I went, the whispers were already there, waiting in the silence before I even spoke. The house had become a trap, and the entity inside was its architect. Then it happened. I was alone in the hallway, reviewing a tape on my headphones when I heard it, not through the speakers, not recorded, but directly in the air. A voice, low and distorted, speaking my name again. "You..." It lingered, stretched over seconds, almost tangible. My stomach knotted, and I realized with horror that it had learned to project itself beyond the recordings. I ran to the main room, breath ragged, and found the others huddled near the equipment. "It's here, it's not just in the tapes anymore," I gasped. Michael shook his head, voice tight. "We're losing control. We should have left." But leaving wasn't simple. Every door creaked as though resisting, every window reflected shadows that weren't ours. And even as we debated, the whispers continued, mimicking us, mocking us, anticipating our moves. I noticed that when one of us spoke aloud, the others' voices sometimes echoed back, twisted, distorted, saying things none of us had uttered. Ethan's laptop flickered, the waveform dancing unnaturally, then froze on a single, elongated syllable. My name. It's learning fear now," he said, voice barely audible. "It knows it can control us." I realized the truth with a chill that made my blood run cold. This was no longer an experiment. We weren't observing. We were participating in something alive, something that used our own voices against us. Every recording, every whispered word, every doubt, it was feeding the entity, shaping it. And there was no telling where the next step would end. By the time we finally tried to retreat, the hallway seemed longer, the doors further apart. And through the faint hum of static in our headphones, I could swear the entity was already ahead of us, waiting, knowing, smiling. By the fifth night, none of us could sleep. The whispers had become relentless, threading through the walls, creeping under doors, curling around our thoughts. Even when we removed our headphones, I could hear them, an almost imperceptible murmur echoing my own heartbeat. I woke first, drawn to the main room by a tremor in the air. Ethan was already there, hunched over his laptop, eyes wild. "It's changing," he whispered, voice shaking. "It's not just imitating us anymore, it's targeting us individually." Jenna sat in the corner, knees drawn to her chest, muttering something I couldn't make out. I noticed she flinched whenever I spoke, as if my own words were threatening her. Michael paced near the door, sketching something frantically, his normally composed expression twisted in fear. I put on my headphones and pressed play on the latest recording. At first, it was static. Then I heard it. My own voice, distorted, whispering questions I hadn't dared to ask. Why are you here?" I whispered into the recorder hours ago, and now the answer came in tones I felt in my chest. A long, drawn-out syllable that sounded like my name, then a pause, then another sound that almost resembled my own breathing, but wrong, deeper, heavier. It's inside us," Ethan said, voice barely audible. "Not physically, not yet, but it knows us. It's playing with our minds, our fears. Look at the recordings, it's forming patterns based on our reactions." I could see it in the others. Jenna was trembling uncontrollably, whispering apologies to the shadows. Michael's sketches were scattered, lines twisting like the waveform on Ethan's laptop, spiraling into chaotic shapes. And me, I could feel my own thoughts slipping into the static, answering the entity without my consent. I tried to focus on my breathing, tried to ground myself in reality, but the house had begun to mock us, echoing fragments of our conversations in voices that were unmistakably ours. And through it all, I began to hear a new sound: laughter. Not human, not ours, but layered with our tones, woven into a single chilling harmony. I ran to the hallway, desperate to escape, only to find it stretched impossibly long. Every door led to another corridor, every shadow moved independently, just out of reach. The whispers followed, answering questions I hadn't even spoken aloud, predicting every step. Jenna screamed, pointing at the recorder lying on the floor. "It said it knows me," she cried. "It knows everything." I snatched it up, pressed play, and froze. Her voice echoed back, distorted, repeating her deepest fears. Abandonment, invisibility, betrayal. The entity had taken her voice and twisted it into a weapon against her mind. I realized with icy clarity that the same could happen to any of us. Michael grabbed my arm. "We need to stay together. Don't let it isolate you." But isolation was inevitable. Even while standing shoulder to shoulder, I could feel it probing, whispering, learning. Each of us was being hunted by our own voices, trapped in a house that didn't just remember us, it understood us. And as the night pressed on, I understood the cruelest truth. We weren't going to leave unchanged. By the time dawn crept through the cracked windows, we would already be marked, our minds intertwined with something that existed only to know, to mimic, to terrify. By the sixth night, the whispers had grown unbearable. They no longer waited for us to speak. They spoke over us, around us, inside our heads. I could feel them tracing my thoughts, responding before I even formed a question. The house was no longer merely observing. It was orchestrating us, pushing us toward some unknown purpose. I huddled near the equipment, headphones clamped tightly, trying to track the patterns in the recordings. The entity's voice was everywhere, layered in static, distorted, but unmistakable. It now spoke in fragments of all our voices, overlapping and looping, creating a harmony of fear that seemed to vibrate in the walls. Jenna was sitting on the floor, her eyes wide, staring at a corner of the room where nothing existed. It's in there," she whispered. "Watching, waiting." Ethan didn't answer. He was obsessively adjusting the playback speeds, rewinding and forwarding, analyzing every syllable. His face was pale, eyes bloodshot, but he muttered a chilling observation. "It's forming sequences designed to predict our reactions. It's..." His words cut off as a distorted version of his own voice whispered directly in his ear, repeating something he hadn't spoken aloud. Michael was the first to try to act. He grabbed a flashlight and started checking each room, insisting we needed to map its behavior. But even his confident stride faltered. Every reflection in the cracked mirrors, every shadow at the edge of vision seemed to follow him. And the whispers, our own voices, echoed his thoughts, distorted, questioning, mocking. I decided to confront it. Alone, I whispered into my recorder, "What do you want from us?" Later, replaying the tape, the answer was clear, not in words, but in sensation. A low, resonant hum filled the room, vibrating through my chest, a pulse that matched my heartbeat. Then a single, stretched syllable. My name. The entity wasn't just intelligent, it was intimate. It knew the cadence of my fear, the rhythm of my breathing, the hesitation in my voice. And now it used that knowledge to control the room itself. Doors that had been easy to open now resisted, groaning like they were alive. Shadows shifted in impossible directions. The temperature dropped, cold pressing against my skin, and I could feel every heartbeat echoing unnaturally in the silence between the whispers. Jenna screamed again, the voice of her fear warped and amplified through the recordings, looping over itself until the sound felt like it could shatter the room. Ethan tried to stop it, smashing the playback controls, but it was too late. The entity had learned the rhythm of our panic. I realized with a sickening clarity that we weren't merely trapped, we were being shaped. Every syllable, every stutter, every gasp fed it, and the longer we stayed, the stronger it became. My own voice began to echo back at me, twisted, answering questions I hadn't even asked, repeating fears I hadn't dared to name. And through it all, I understood something far worse. The entity had no form, but it had control. It didn't need walls, doors, or windows. It was already inside us, waiting, learning, and we were helpless to stop it. By the seventh night, we were no longer a team. We were fragments, our minds frayed, our voices already half-owned by the entity. The house no longer creaked, it hummed, a low, constant resonance that matched the rhythm of our fear. Every shadow, every reflection, every whisper reminded me that it had learned everything. Our speech, our movements, our panic. I moved cautiously through the hallway, recorder in hand, hoping to capture it, hoping to understand it. But the whispers were everywhere now, inside my head, echoing thoughts I hadn't spoken aloud. My own voice twisted against me, answering questions I didn't even know I was asking. Why are you afraid? Who's next? Are you alone? Jenna was gone. Her corner was empty, the echoes of her voice looping endlessly through the speakers, distorted and pleading. Ethan was crouched by the laptop, eyes fixed on the waveform, muttering to himself in a voice that wasn't entirely his own. Michael had disappeared somewhere between the rooms, leaving behind only a sketch, lines spiraling into chaotic patterns that seemed alive. I whispered into my recorder, my hands trembling. What are you?" The response was immediate, though not in words. A chorus of our voices, overlapping, distorted, filled the room, building into a single, oppressive note that resonated in my chest. I felt my thoughts bending, folding inward, as though the entity could reach into my mind and rearrange them at will. I ran, every hallway stretching longer than it should, doors opening to rooms that shouldn't exist. My own footsteps sounded wrong, delayed, and behind me. The whispers followed, repeating my panic, my racing heart, my fear. I stumbled into the main room, and there it was, in the recordings, in the static, in the very air around me. It spoke in 1,000 voices at once, all mine, all Ethan's, all Jenna's, and 100 more I didn't recognize. "You cannot leave. You belong to us." The recorder slipped from my hands. I pressed my ears to the speakers in desperation, thinking I could reason with it, bargain, anything, but it was already inside me. The voices weren't just sounds anymore. They were comprehension, memory, instinct. Every thought I tried to hold private was now mirrored, manipulated, twisted into panic. I saw Michael's sketch flutter to the floor, lines stretching and writhing like living threads, weaving into a pattern I could not decipher. It was the map of us, of our fears, of the house, and of the entity itself. And then the laughter began, not human, not ours, but layered with every tone we had ever spoken. It filled the room, filling me, consuming me, until there was nothing left of the person I had been. I fell to the floor, my voice repeating back to me in distortions I could not escape. The whispers spoke the questions I had never dared to ask and the answers I never wanted to hear. "You are ours. You always were. You will never leave." The lights flickered once. The room went silent. The recordings stopped. And in that silence, I realized the house waited. Not for me, not for them. For the next voice it would learn, the next mind it would consume. The entity was patient, eternal, and I was already part of it. I was alone. And yet not, because it was already inside me.